Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Americans for Peace Now webinar. Those of you who are veteran APN webinar watchers know that this is the part where I engage in the most Washington of activities, the filibuster. It takes a moment for everybody to get in, to get signed in and logged on. So we're going to give it just that minute and then introduce our guests, and we will get started. So for those of you who are in already, thank you for your patience. Apologies that you have to listen to me ramble for one more moment, but we're getting there. The numbers are going up. There we go, 100, 105, still going. Nice coffee mug there, Yoni. Again, hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Americans for Peace Now webinar. I am Hadar Suskind, the president and CEO of APN. I am glad, as always, to have all of you with us. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. As you probably know, but it's always important to be reminded, this webinar will be recorded. So we will share it with everyone who's registered and everyone else for that matter afterward. If you'd like to share it with other folks, friends, family, who knows. Also, after we hear from our speakers, we will be taking questions. As usual, we will use the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen. So if you have questions, again, don't use the chat or the hand raise, use the Q&A function. We will get to as many of them as possible. If we can't get to all of the questions, we will share them with Yoni, we will share them with Hagit and try to get answers back to you. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to start us off with saying, as we have for the last number of weeks now, this is obviously continues to be, frankly, a very, very difficult time. And our topic is always important and always serious. It is specifically very heavy right now as fighting continues in Gaza, rockets into Israel, not only from Gaza, but from other sources as well. Of course, most of the conversation, most of what we're hearing, seeing, reading is focused on Gaza and that conflict with Hamas. There's been some conversation, rightly so, also about the northern border, Hezbollah and others, and the threats there. But there is, as we are about to hear, really a third important front, and that is, of course, what's happening in the West Bank, which has been very troubling and very problematic this past month. I'm glad to have our friends and our colleagues here to talk with us today, to share their expertise and some of their recent work. You can see Hagit Ofran's name on the screen. Hagit is here and is in transit and will be joining us on camera in just a moment. I know most, if not all of you, are familiar with Hagit from her long time work at Shalom Achshav and leading Settlement Watch. I'm really happy to introduce, to those of you who don't know him, Yoni Mizrachi, who joined Shalom Achshav and is now the co-director, I believe, of Settlement Watch, along with Hagit. Some of you may have met Yoni or seen him in his work previously, as he was the founder and former executive director of Emek Shaveh, but he is a longtime ally and partner in this work, and we're very happy to have him at Shalom Achshav and is part of our family now. So Yoni, maybe you want to take just a moment and introduce yourself a little more to the crowd, because I think this is your first time with us, at least in a long time.
Yes. So first of all, thanks you, Hadar, and obviously for organizing the event, and thank you all for coming. So I'm located in Jerusalem, actually. Now I joined Peace Now about 8 or 9 months ago. I don't remember. Something like that. As the co-director of the Settlement Watch, I'm focusing mainly in the West Bank, but in the last year, actually, I followed what happened also in East Jerusalem. Before that, as Hadar mentioned, I founded an organization called Emek Shaveh, and I was director of Emek Shaveh for about 12 years. I founded it in 2009, and I ended my position because I thought it's about time to do something else. And in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, in the end of 2021, I think. In my profession, I'm an archaeologist. And yes, and I think that I'm dealing with this, if you could say, conflict or situation in the West Bank for about maybe 20 years, or something like that. I don't remember. Yeah. And I'm very happy actually to be here today. Yeah.
Good. Well, again, we are happy to have you with us in the Shalom Achshav APN family and with us today. So Yoni and Hagit and their colleagues have just put out a new report about what's happening this month in the West Bank. And that's really where we want to focus the conversation today. So Yoni, I'm just going to hand it over to you. Why don't you start telling us about it?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So since the war began, or what happened, the massacre in October 7th happened in the south, we obviously continued to monitor what's happening in the West Bank. I mean, this is our job, actually, it's our profession. Also, we know that in time of tension, time of armed conflict, mainly in Gaza Strip, but not only in Gaza Strip, we know that there's a lot of activity that the settlers are doing and actually taking advantage in this situation. But I think that what happened a month ago is definitely different than what we knew before. And also the military and the settlers and even the Palestinians did it differently. So I'm going just to mention the few main things that I think we should focus on. I think that we should pay attention about when we're talking about the West Bank in the last month. The first thing, which is very concerning, is the rise of the number of the settlers' violence events, settler incidents with the Palestinians. Settler violence is not something new. Settler violence began with, unfortunately, with settlements, like 50 years ago, but it's definitely increasing in the last few years. 2023, it was another high number of settlers events and settler violence. But the main thing that we were witnessed is actually a situation that the settlers used violence to evacuate Palestinian communities, mainly in Area C. Area C is the area that is controlled by Israel. In the West Bank is divided to Area A, B, and C. Area C is controlled by the Israelis, and also Palestinian communities living there. So the first thing that we noticed is that the settlers took kind of initiative, we can say, to evacuate it or to harass or to threat Palestinian communities, telling them they have to leave, sometimes using forces, sometimes using, stealing the property or burning the properties or all kind of actions. We cannot prove it actually, but we know that that's what happened. But the Palestinians definitely telling us and showing us that the settlers are the one who actually demand them to leave. So since the war began, we're talking about almost 1,000 people that had to leave their place in Area C and to move to Area B or Area A. That's one thing that's happening. The violence is not just by forcing communities to leave, it's also, we're talking about violence, settlers violence that ends with shooting on Palestinians, including killing Palestinians. The most known case happened about a week and a half ago in a settlement called Rehalim, Asawane, Palestinian village of Asawane, when the settlers killed Palestinians that just did an olive harvest. But we know also about other cases that the settlers were involved in shooting. We also have footages of that. And it's very important, and it's actually increasing a lot, because I want to say that usually in kind of a normal time, we monitor and a lot of media around every kind of settlers events of violence, like killing Palestinians is definitely a big issue. But because of the war, people hardly hear about it. And that's one of the things that's happening. Something else which is very relevant to the West Bank is that what happened is that Israel recruited a lot of soldiers. That's what's happening when we have a military operation like this. But actually what happened that many settlers are now recruited as soldiers, wearing soldiers' uniforms, but they're actually securing their own settlements, which means that sometimes when the Palestinian communities been forced, or when they have interactions with the IDF, the Palestinian communities actually having interaction with the neighbor settlers who's telling them that they have to leave, just coming with the IDF uniforms. From the Palestinians' angle, which I think is very important to mention, since the war began, the Palestinians are actually located in kind of a siege that they cannot leave their own villages or town and they cannot actually move from one big city to another big city. For example, if they want to move from Hebron to Bethlehem, for example, they have to use road which is called road number 60, which the main road, which is in Area C. But since the military decided to block many of the cities, so there are hardly any Palestinians present in most of Area C. And I'm mentioning that because the settlers also trying to influence on the IDF to prevent the Palestinians to go back to normal life in Area C or to have more interaction between themselves, like from one city to another. Violence settlers is not just against communities, it's also against people that are doing their harvest in the road or near settlements. It's also something that happened a lot. We also noticed that the settlers themselves interrupting or trying to affect the military decisions in Area C. We monitored cases where the settlers decided to prevent from an armed vehicle that belongs to the Palestinian Authority, which their responsibility is to do their own security work in Area A and B. So we monitor a situation when the settlers decided, no, we don't want to give weapon to the Palestinian Authority, they're all an enemy, and they just prevented. We also know that sometimes when the IDF decided to open checkpoints and things like that in order to allow Palestinians to go out, the settlers prevent that or doing demonstrations, sometimes even reclosing it after the IDF leaving. So there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of tension there. And the settlers trying to create a situation that the Palestinians cannot leave Area A and B. That's the feeling we have. The IDF trying to do whatever he can to protect mainly the settlers, but in many ways, I think he's also trying to protect the Palestinians. And I think that also the security forces understand that, let's say, the flames are very high and they're trying to prevent the explosion. And the most concerning thing, and maybe with that I will end, is that the political level, the politicians in Israel are kind of, we can say, indifferent to what's happening in the West Bank. I mean, we didn't hear anything from any politician about the tension of the settlers' violence. We didn't hear anything about the situation in the West Bank. The only thing that we heard was Netanyahu saying something very general about settlers' violence. And in the Israeli media, if you're reading the Israeli left media, so it said that Netanyahu mentioned the settlers' violence, but he said it's minority. In the right-wing media, they quote Netanyahu saying, I told President Biden, settlers' violence is not a problem, or something like that, or it's not a big problem. So according to what we see today, even if the security forces would like to keep situation calm as they can in the West Bank, unfortunately, the politicians are not there, not helping, in many ways, actually supporting the settlers' demands. And in general, I mean, I'm actually, traveling a lot in the West Bank. The feeling is that from the beginning of the war, the tensions just rise a lot, and there definitely must be done kind of measures to relax the situation. I think that's kind of a general overview about what I see, and maybe later I will go to more details.
Great. Toda. Thank you, Yoni. Hagit, hello. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Would you like to take?
I'm sorry. I was a little late. I was out in a demonstration at Netanyahu's residence, demanding the release of all the 240 captives, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is now the most important thing. I think, and I really hope that something is moving there, but I have no idea. I just want to say that you are welcome to read in our report the details of the kind of activities that are taking place now in the West Bank. I just want to put it in the frame. What we see in recent years that the settlers are trying to do in general is that it's no longer just taking more land or putting another settlement. What we see in the last several years, when they started to build those agriculture outposts, the farms that are there to take over huge amount of land by herding the flocks and by sometimes farming land, what they do is physically kicking out Palestinians. So it's not only taking more land to be Israeli, but it's also kicking out Palestinians from their land. And we see it all the time as a system to prevent Palestinians from going to their lands. And what we see now, since the 7th of October, is that settlers are going out daily to attack the Palestinian communities, and they already brought to the eviction of almost 1,000 Palestinians, around 15 communities that evicted, and many, many others that ran away from this violence that is occurring now daily. So, and that's on the ground. There is also the campaign that the settlers are doing in last few years, is they call it the battle over Area C, trying to say that Area C should be only Israeli and that no Palestinian is allowed there. So what we see on the ground now is the fruits of this policy, and actually the settlers that are, taking advantage of the war to kick out Palestinians. And another aspect that there is that the general violence, that people are so angry, and the revenge that we see, also soldiers that are humiliating and beating Palestinians. That's also in like the general atmosphere. So violence is very high. I want to say that I think it's very, very dangerous, because we had several cases where settlers killed Palestinians, came into a village, created this friction, this trying to get their attention and to get them angry, and eventually shooting at Palestinians. And we don't know what will happen if another shooting will occur, and what will be the reaction of Palestinians. So it's very dangerous, and it's really like we call it the third front that might erupt if the government is not strong enough to hold the settlers back.
Thank you. There is, again, as both of you laid out, there are a series of, problems, challenges, bad things going on. I want to put two questions together, and maybe Yoni, you'll start, and Hagit, obviously weigh in as soon as you are prepared to do so. So one question that came from one of our audience is, what literally says, how much are the IDF and the Israeli government colluding with the settlers in their attempts to drive the Palestinians off their land? So, you mentioned a little bit that sometimes the settlers are the soldiers also. but adding that level of government and what has been the government's policies around this. And then I'll add on to the question, really, Hagit, what you just ended with, the concept of a third front. And, do you think, well, the IDF, at least, if not the government, do you think there's taking that into consideration seriously right now as a security concern in the midst of the broader violence? So two pieces go together. Yoni?
So, okay, yes. So about, if I understand it, about like the involvement of the government. I mean, listen, I mean, maybe I'm an archaeologist, and I'm always saying that I'm checking not what people saying, but what people doing. Like the facts on the ground, not what they wrote eventually. And I think that it's very clear that this government dealing with strengthening the extremist settlers. I mean, during the whole year, it's very clear with giving a lot of power to Smotrich, with Smotrich actually today is responsible to what's happening in the West Bank when it comes to the settlers, enforcing the law when it's Palestinians and not enforcing the law when it's settlers. This has also happened before October 7th. It's not that nothing didn't change since then. And we would expect maybe that Netanyahu will understand that now this is the time to try to control the extremists in the West Bank. Like we could see last week that the coalition decided to appoint a very extremist Knesset member, Tzvi Sukkot, which is he's part of a Smotrich party. He's now responsible. He's now today the head of the security committee in the Knesset that's responsible to security in the West Bank, which means that he's the one that's supposed to invite the generals and ask them, how come you're not enforcing the law on Palestinians harder? How come you're dealing with the good Israelis, settlers who would like just to, I don't know, to build Israel whatsoever? And this is kind of an indication to where this government goes. And I'm saying that because according to my understanding, and I do believe that the IDF and the security forces don't want to deal with another front. And they're definitely aware to what we are saying. I mean, they know even much more than us. But I don't see, as long as the government are not dealing with the event and not decided to take steps against it, I don't see how things will change actually, and that's very concerning.
Yeah. Hagit, you want to weigh in on that?
I just want to say that the settlers were never, or the extremist settlers were never so strong, as they are now. We have figures that are hilltop youth, those violent settlers that are in the government, in the coalition, in the Knesset. Minister Smotrich had already in the past published his plan to how to make the Palestinians surrender, and his plan is if whoever of the Palestinians agrees to accept our superiority, our control, is welcome to stay. But if you don't, then Israel should take advantage of a violent round of a war and kick them out. That's an explicit written plan by Smotrich. And I think many of the settlers think that this is the chance. We have this war. We have this big event, and we should take advantage of it. So I don't see that the government is ready to do anything to those settlers now. But we saw that President Biden managed to bring Netanyahu to say a word about it. So I believe, in some reports in the press are saying that the army is very concerned, or at least the higher ranks are very concerned, and they are telling Netanyahu that he should restrain the settlers, but and it's like a tension there, but it's not easy politically. It's very easy militarily. I mean, if we want to stop this, I mean, first of all, Israel or the army, as Jonathan said, recruited the settlers to be soldiers or reserve soldiers in the settlements, which makes sense. But if you have soldiers that are violent and they are using military guns in order to shoot Palestinians, you should release them and take the guns away from them. If you put soldiers to protect now all the outposts and all settlements, which you should now, you should tell them also to make sure that those settlers are not acting violently, not only protecting them from potential violence of Palestinians. So there is a lot of quote unquote easy things that the military can do. And of course, the police, if they start to investigate seriously, because we know the names of those settlers who come again and again in South Hebron Hills to this Susia community or other communities. We know who they are. The police knows who they are. Also in Jordan Valley, it's very easy to do something, but there is no political will.
I want to do something I don't usually do, which is just interject a little point, and I have a question, because there have been a lot of questions about what can the U.S. do, what should the U.S. do. So I just want to share with folks one thing that we are talking to people in the administration and talking to people in Congress about, again, as the U.S. frankly is struggling to try to answer those questions, right? What can they do right now? What should they do right now? Is to make sure that the efforts to weaken or perhaps destroy the Palestinian Authority are resisted by the U.S. government, that there are, those within the Israeli government who are opposing giving the tax funds to the PA. There are those who are saying, Hagit, I think building off what you were saying, that this is the opportunity to get rid of the PA also. And that's definitely a piece that we're talking to folks here about, speaking out against the settler violence and speaking out against those efforts. And then the question I want to put to you guys, there's been reporting, I mean, it's true, right, about recent arms transfers from the US to Israel. And there's also reporting, which is separate, but here comes the question part, about the Israeli government, right, giving weapons to the settlers to defend themselves. So we're getting a couple different people asking whether those are connected and whether we think that those weapons are going to settlers, and we know that or not. And I'll just say that the State Department has said that the Israeli government said, we're not going to do that. So that's like the first line is someone in the Israeli government told the State Department, no, we're not going to give them those guns. But what are you actually seeing and what do you know on the ground about this?
I think there are two things that Israel is now doing with weapons. One is, in general, telling people, if you want weapon for your personal use, it's now going to be easier to get a license to get guns. So more people will be allowed to carry guns. And especially if you're a settler, that's one condition that is almost automatically allows you now to
I think it literally does, correct? I think I thought it literally does. My understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, was that if you live in a settlement, you just have to ask for one. And even if you've been convicted of violent crime, even if you have other things that normally would keep you from getting a gun.
I don't think it's like nothing at all, but almost nothing additional to be living in a settlement. Yeah. And that wasn't the case 5 weeks ago. Okay. Right. 5 weeks ago, you had to be some kind of, trained and other things. But the other things that is going on is that technically giving weapon to settlers. And here, if I understand correctly, some of it is going to be, it's not that now you own a gun privately, but it's like the gun of your settlement. So it's like, I don't know if they put it in one place, and if you are on guard, you take it, or you take it anyway. And there is the gun. There are the guns that the government is giving away, giving to settlers, and there is also initiatives of the settler communities or the settler regional council, like the Shomron Council, who took money from donors from the US, and he was saying from Miami and other places, that donated money to buy hundreds of guns to be distributed in the northern West Bank to settlers. In terms of American guns, specifically M16, did they use those? I don't know. Maybe, Yoni, did you notice there are so many videos that they put out how they distributing guns? It's really sad what's going on. So I don't know if they included the M16 or American weapon there or not. I don't know.
Well, if I can add to that, actually, that I just want to say one thing. Like Hagit mentioned, before October 7th, it was very difficult to get a license for weapons in Israel. It was not easy. You have to be a trained soldier, 3 years in the army and things like that, maybe a bit less. Now you still need to be like, if you have to be like above 21 and with 1 year of training in the army. It doesn't matter like what level you can be, like a fighter or not. So it becomes much easier. Although, but obviously it takes time until people get the license, like long queue. But I just want to say because I noticed about the weapons, and I saw, for example, they're still using M16, definitely. I mean, they're still using M16, the settlers, but I think it's guns they got from before. Like, this is the most popular weapon, but when we're talking about Shomron Council, they bought hundreds of guns, like Hagit mentioned. They actually bought guns from Israeli factories, so they bought an Israeli guns. But as Hagit mentioned, it came from American evangelicals and others that support the gun, definitely, yes.
Okay, slightly different topic question, because that one was really depressing. Not that this one is so great, but it's better. Somebody asked about today's high court decision stating that settlers have been unlawfully occupying a specific piece of land, Palestinian land in the Jordan Valley. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? And B, do you think that the fact that there's some demonstration of some function of justice, in the small sense, does that have any kind of positive impact on the broader situation?
The ruling, I think it's yesterday, is about many dunams that were taken, private Palestinian dunam lands that were taken by settlers in the Jordan Valley that are used to grow dates. The court had no choice but to rule that it's illegal because it's privately owned by Palestinians. And the ruling is, it's saying they give 7 years to the settlers, to find the alternative so that they will not lose so much, so these kind of things. But eventually it says in 7 years, the land should go back to the owner. So that's a good outcome. But I think politically right now, it has no effect, everyone is distracted, and I think it's a good thing, because what usually happens then is that the right wing is using those rulings in order to attack the court even more.
I say, not that they're not attacking the court as it is, but it would have been one more.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yoni, do you want to add anything on that, or no? Okay. So different question. Going back to the conversation around soldiers and settlers, and sometimes they're the same people and sometimes they're different people. We got a question here about whether there have been any instances of soldiers either refusing, to participate in violence against Palestinians, et cetera, in the West Bank over these last weeks, or even like reporting abuses, or are we just seeing kind of the army and the settlers line up together? Anybody?
Yoni, you can take that.
I can take that. I don't know if I have the information about it actually, so I can take it. But because usually, as probably some of you know, there's an organization called Breaking the Silence, who are actually collecting information from soldiers, but they usually do the collecting information after the event, or after the soldiers ending their military service. Usually, I mean, I don't know, I don't remember about the cases where soldiers in the middle of an event or something like that try to prevent from their colleague soldiers to not to do like a violent act. It's usually before, after, what I know, like before means demanding not to join in the West Bank, or after. Actually, I don't remember about other cases, but maybe
I think it's not a refusal thing. It's always the person or the commander in the place will set the tone for what will happen. Okay, so there are commanders that will tell their soldiers not to hit any prisoner, or not to touch anybody, and others that will encourage beating up Palestinians. And I think many of what we are talking about, that soldiers, reserve soldiers that are actually settlers, are going in those small communities and setting fire in houses, or stealing the water, or things of the sort. I think there are anyway, there are those settlers there. It's like a small unit that is all corrupt, I will say. And in other places, the soldiers will not do that if they are not politically motivated to kicking out Palestinians.
Yeah. I've got another question for you guys in a minute, but I want to remind everybody again, if you have questions, use the Q&A button, and feel free. So I mentioned briefly the government's efforts, or the efforts of some in the government to weaken and perhaps totally destroy the Palestinian Authority. Can you talk a little bit about what the PA is doing right now? How are they trying to keep things from boiling over? What are they able to do? What are the challenges they're facing now?
Yoni, do you know anything? I don't know much. I know that in the beginning, immediately after 7th of October, there were riots of Palestinians in the streets of Ramallah, of Jenin, of Nablus. Many Palestinians went out to the streets, and actually they were demonstrating against the PA, or they were actually going out because of the shooting in Gaza, and angry, but then they turned to protest against the PA, and the PA, the Palestinian Authority, was very strong in dispersing the riots, and I think they were afraid of losing control. So they used power against their own people. I don't know to what extent what we call the security coordination, which is the assistance that the Palestinian Authority is giving Israel, is now working. I believe it is Israel has detained, I think, around 1,000 people, Palestinians, since the 7th of October, saying that they are Hamas activists, trying to prevent things to occur also in the West Bank. I don't know to what extent there was assistance of the Palestinian Authority. I believe there was, because this is how things work, that the Palestinian Authority is helping Israel in those arrests, in those activities, in coordinations, etc. The challenge of the PA is huge, huge. I mean, they are, from a Palestinian perspective, they gave nothing. They managed to get nothing to the Palestinians, and Hamas now, with all this horrible thing, eventually they made Israel, they score points, and the PA is like, Abbas published a condemnation as soon as things started to be clear about what happened, but then he erased it. I think that's kind of explaining where they stand. I mean, a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Maybe I can add to that. I mean, also I don't really follow. I mean, I follow, but I don't know much about what's happening with the Palestinian Authority. But before October 7, if we're going back a bit, so we know already that you can say that the Palestinian Authority lost control in Jenin. I mean, Jenin is a Palestinian city in the north of the West Bank. People say maybe not in all of Jenin, maybe only in the refugee camp. But so they try to take over back their power there, but they definitely lost the power there. Since October 7, we see lots of clashes between the IDF and the Palestinians in the Palestinian cities. We're talking about
right now. I think there's, shooting happening in Jenin literally right now.
Yeah, in Jenin, always in Jenin. But I just want to say that not only in Jenin, we see also a lot of clashes in Tulkarem, which is another Palestinian city, maybe a bit more to the west, but also in the north. And this is to me, it's kind of indicators that the Palestinian Authority is losing power, which is not surprising. I mean, Israel succeeded. I mean, Israel worked very hard to weaken the Palestinian Authority for 20 years. So here's the outcome. By the way, until the last week decisions of the Israeli government, if by transferring their own money or not, like there was also calling the discussions. So that's when it comes to the security. Although like Hagit mentioned, eventually the security forces of the Palestinians are helping us. I mean, they are crucial to the security of the West Bank.
Yeah. So I want to go back actually to the report that you guys just put out. And again, for those of you, if you didn't see it, we already shared a link in the chat, so you can find it there. What are the recommendations, pardon me, what are the steps that could be taken? Again, we know this government is fortunately not likely to take them, but it could be taken by the Israeli government, by the Americans, by others to help try to address what's happening in the West Bank, address the settler violence there. Who would like to start?
So maybe I will start and then Hagit will. I think that first of all, Israel has to decide, or the government has to decide that, okay, this is a front that we have to deal with, to put energy, time, and efforts, whatever it's needed. We mentioning in the report that, and Hagit mentioned that we know where the violence come from. I mean, more or less, we don't know. I mean, more or less, we know where are the places where most of the violent settlers are going out from or organizing, and we see that also where the settlers was hitting. So, and I'm saying that because we know that the security forces know where the problem is, and the problem is not that big. That's what I want to say. I mean, it's a problem. I mean, it is a problem that can explode. But when you count the number of the settlers who are involved in violence, when you count the outpost that maybe the violent settlers going out from, so it's something that if the Israeli government will decide to take measures to prevent it, they can do that. But that has to be the decision that the security forces having a front, and so it's just a matter of a will, not a matter of other thing. Something else, which is obviously that the IDF must decide and put a clear line to his soldiers that if you are a soldier, it doesn't matter if you are living in a West Bank settlement or not, you are behaving according to the soldier decision. You cannot go by yourself and evacuating Palestine, things like that. So just by enforcing the law, as simple as that, I think a lot of things can be achieved in the West Bank. For this, we need the government. I think that's how I understand it.
Yeah, and another thing that we mentioned in the report is that there are a few outposts that are the source of a lot of violence, and some of them are very small, and the government can evict them and say enough is enough, because they're illegal anyway. They're supposed to be evicted. So if they are causing such a huge problem and such a threat of the security of Israel, then it's only natural that they should be evicted.
Yeah, just want to note on that. The settlements, the outposts that Hagit is referring to are illegal even by Israeli law, right? Of course, under international law, they're all illegal, but even under Israeli law, these settlements are illegal, and yet, unfortunately, allowed to continue to be there and to, tolerated by the government. Okay. I'm going to go off topic a little bit and take advantage just of having the two of you here to ask you a question that's not about settler violence and the report. So my apologies for the wild card. People are very understandably dealing with the day-to-day of the war right now, what is happening in Israel, Gaza, the West Bank also. But people, at least outside of the Israeli government, which appears to not be thinking about the day after, are thinking about the day after. What do you think we're going to see in Israel politically when this war ends?
Thank you, Hadar, for asking this. I think it's a very important moment, and we should think about it. And maybe I will leave the question of what do we think will happen to Yoni, but
or what
I want to say
should happen either way.
No, exactly. I want to say this is a huge crisis, but it's also an opportunity, and I think things are not going to be the same in many ways. And the cement is still wet, and I think now is the time for us to try to shape it so that it will go to the direction of a change, to the right direction, to the possibility of the end of occupation and the end of and the two-state outcome. I think that, I mean, it's a wishful thinking, but I do believe that now Israelis understand that the Palestinian issue is not to be neglected. We cannot say that it's not a problem. We cannot say that it's not a priority. And I think also that many would agree now that we cannot continue with what we did all the time. And I think most Israelis, I always thought that most Israelis don't really care about the settlements and the West Bank. And I think if pressures are put strongly enough, we may get the ship to turn to a new direction. I hope. And if I may also add
Please.
one point about pressures, I think we are so lucky that we have the American involvement here, and this administration's close attention to everything that is going on here. I mean, for me, is like, oh, finally we have a reasonable adult that is around. That it's not that I'm praying, to have foreign entities to control Israel, but in our case, with our government, we do need an adult, and I think the fact that you got Netanyahu to say something about settler violence, for instance, is only because of the American involvement, and it's only because the Americans understood that it's an issue. And it's very important, and of course, and that's a very small thing that the American involvement is now giving us. Of course, we're talking about direct security, etc. So I hope that this involvement will be used to push us to stop this occupation, because it's not viable, it's not sustainable, and we have to start something else.
Thank you, Hagit. Just Yoni, before I turn it to you, I want to say, you talked earlier about how settlers and the Minister of Settlements and others are looking at this war as an opportunity, right? As an opportunity to kick Palestinians out, to do all sorts of other things. Obviously, none of us, the word opportunity makes it sound like a positive, so I certainly don't want to say that. But I agree with what you were saying, that, change follows trauma in many cases, follows traumatic events. We know this from Israel's own history. We know it from everywhere else in the world. And there is no doubt that for Israelis, for Palestinians, I think, frankly, for everyone else, there's no going back to October 6th. And so what comes next remains unknown, but there is both the possibility and certainly the necessity for us to take that moment and hopefully turn it to something better. So thank you. Yoni, you want to add either on what you hope, but also what you think we might see?
Yeah, I mean, I hope and think that I'm a bit optimistic, but just want to say before my optimism, I just want to say that it's not just October 7. I think that the last year, if I'm looking at 2023, a lot of things happened and changed in the Israeli society, in the Israeli public. I mean, when we're talking about the demonstration, people that decided that they want to fight for the right, for how they see democracy and things like that, although they were not involved in the occupation, and activists in the occupation say that it's not enough and things like that. I think there was kind of a movement that is very important and very relevant to what I hope and believe we will see after the war. That there's kind of a public that demands his rights and demands a change. And I think that what happened, again, I also hope, maybe I'm wrong, but what will happen is that these people will demand also a change in the West Bank, because it's very clear that the Palestinians issue is part of the Israeli problem, which was not clear before October 7 for many people, like Hagit mentioned. So this is why I'm optimistic, and I think that let's say we have a lot of public behind us. I hope so. Okay, because the sarcastic people say, yeah, but eventually in the demonstration only 500 people coming. But I believe there's something going to change because of that. And I think also, and then when I see the international situation here, people understand that we have to strengthen the moderate forces and not the extremists. So I'm optimistic also about this. And my only concern is, I'm going back to you, is what will be who will be or how will be the new administration in the United States? Obviously, that's an important factor. That's how I understand it.
Yeah. Well, we're concerned about that too, for what it's worth. In a nonpartisan 501c3 fashion, of course. So again, I just, I want to thank you both. I think we all have to deal with the reality right now. We all have to deal with what's happening in the West Bank, in Israel, in Gaza, the impacts on Israelis and Palestinians. And frankly, what's happening here in the US. I mean, this is, like I said before we started publicly, we are of course experiencing, the reflections, the ripples of what you guys are living in the day-to-day. But it is absolutely changing the reality in America, in the American Jewish community, and in America writ large as well. So I think we hopefully have seen, Hagit, like you said, the end of the concept of shrinking the conflict or managing the conflict, that more Israelis and certainly more Americans, I think, are coming to the understanding that that is unsustainable. And whether it is as part of some possible Saudi deal that was being discussed, broader pieces, different efforts, we know we need to find a new way forward. Ori has just put in the chat and subtly reminded me, thank you, Ori, that again, we will be sharing the audio recording of this as a Peacecast episode later, and the video as well. So Hagit, Yoni, thank you both. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for all the work. Sending love from all of us to you and your families and everyone there. And thank you for everyone who joined. We will see you another time. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Adar and everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.